When tragedy strikes in aviation, it's the most dreaded thought and experience, a plane crash. We've all been through it to some extent, at least seen it in the news. And it's not just the aviation community that feels the sadness and the tragedy around the event, but the entire country and sometimes even the world takes a pause when something like this occurs. So today, let's focus on what taking a pause can mean and how we can best cope with these tragedies and be supportive of ourselves in the aviation community, others in the community, and those outside. I'm Jackie Elmer. Learn more about me at pilotwifepodcasts.com. I wanted to share about this after decades of navigating this myself and plenty of what I deem as missteps, both by well-intentioned friends and others, and my own faux pas, honestly, of handling situations from the past. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes, but my thought is when we know better, we can do better. So I'm a bit of an aviation and airplane crash geek. I confess that, as I've read practically every book, watched every movie and documentary ever made that I know of, and studied many previous aviation disasters. I don't know why. Perhaps it's because I come from the aviation profession, but it seems to me that it started even before that. Because for years, I was flight fascinated. I can remember most of my life watching airplanes fly over and wondering about the souls on board. Not really a term that I like, but I did. I wondered about the people on board the airplane. Who are they? Where are they going? Why? What are the thoughts and feelings and emotions that they have? Are they happy they're going to a wedding or the birth of a child? Are they sad they're going to a funeral? I mean, what is it simply another business trip? What is going on in the thoughts of those that are on board that airplane? And I always pondered this more even after an airplane crash, and maybe you do too. So, where we are today requires a little common sense. We don't want to make the mistake of overshooting the approach and land in our own ditch of looking foolish and adding more anxiety to what is obviously a very tense and sad situation. So, every time I hear a breaking report, I think to myself, and this is not just about aviation, it's probably 50 to 50% accurate at best. And now, as time has passed and is passing, this is proving to be true. Let's start with the obvious, the January 29th crash of the American Airlines regional partner and the Black Hawk helicopter in Washington, D.C. It's no mystery, and it's not uncommon to know that the Reagan Airport is its own interesting mess with all of the logistics. That's been known for years. I'm not a pilot, so I'm not going to say more about that. I'm simply stating the obvious and what I've heard discussed in aviation for decades, and certainly have had that discussion with my pilot husband. So, where do we even begin to focus? We always start with, especially those in aviation, that's who I'm speaking to specifically right now, was it our airline? Where is my aviation partner? Where are my aviation friends who I know fly for that airline, whether it's my own airline or not? And how do I begin to get the facts? Like most, I remember the unfolding of 9/11 like it was yesterday. Now, long before 9/11 happened, I had given up watching the news and TV. Even to this day, I'm just not a TV person. So I had quit the news back in, I believe it was 1997, honestly. I had basically quit the news. And I had always said, if something really important happens, believe me, I'm going to find out about it. Well, early on that morning of 9/11 in Phoenix, in my home where I lived at the time, now I'm back in Scottsdale, but anyway, my phone rang, and it was a very close friend of mine asking me if I was watching the news and if I knew what was going on. The reality of it is she knew I wasn't watching the news, and she wanted to know where Mark, my husband, was. And honestly, I remember stopping for a moment and thinking, I'm not sure where he is. I was in the throes of early children. My kids were very young. So it was, getting them up, getting breakfast, getting them dressed, getting them off to preschool and kindergarten and all of that. And it was before cell phones were common. There were a few, but in 2001, most people didn't have a cell phone unless you were in a career that required it. If you've ever watched My Best Friend's Wedding, my favorite part of that is the very beginning where Julia Roberts pulls out that giant telephone out of her purse and answers it. That was early cell phones. Now, I was fortunate in that he was on the ground within 30 minutes and called me. Within 30 minutes of finding out what was going on, turning on the news, watching the horror unfold, I knew that he was safe and on the ground, and he was in Wichita, Kansas. But even he, when he first called me, didn't know much. He was like, I don't really know for sure what's going on. What do you know? What happened? Really, the only thing he truly knew was what came across what I'm going to call a teletype machine. I don't think they still have those today, but it was a little communication device. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. You can correct me, but I'm going to call it a teletype machine that was in the cockpit that would, print off information to them. And it basically gave them instructions. Get on the ground. You're going to Wichita. Now, obviously, they had been in communication with the tower, but this was the communication from the company itself. And he was actually headed from Tulsa to Los Angeles, where he was terminating and then would be coming back to Phoenix. 4 days off. That was on a Tuesday. It's funny how some of us never forget that that date was on a Tuesday, and all airplanes were grounded until that Friday. And then he had to go back to work on Saturday. Totally different story. But I remember then being glued to the news for days, wondering what was going on, what we would learn, all of that. Now, today, with news, social media, phones, texting, emails, X, podcasts, YouTube, all of that, we often learn more factual and non-factual and pure speculation than maybe we care to know, and certainly more than is healthy to know. Everyone these days, it seems, wants to be the first to report and certainly the first to speculate about what's gone on. I have watched so many news reports, either reading or watching, of aviation professionals, whether it be military, whether it be airline, whether it be even, private pilots who want to report on what they think happened. And the reality of it is, no one really needs this. No one really needs this. I have come to appreciate my husband's rules when it comes to that. He will never comment on what he thinks happened, whether I ask him, whether friends, family members ask him. He always says, first thing, I wasn't there. I don't know all the conditions that can't be seen, condition of, so many things. I'm not going to speculate, because if I were in that situation, I wouldn't want anybody Monday morning quarterbacking me or what went on during that. And, over time, it used to frustrate me. I'll be honest. I wanted to sit there and dig into it with him. Yeah, but what do you think happened? I mean, this is what they're saying. And what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he just really would never go there. And over time, I've learned to truly appreciate that. And I'm going to share a little bit more about why I've come to appreciate that as we go through here, when I share the story of meeting the widow of a captain in a crash. Just an arbitrary random meeting. So there's so many things that go into it, health issues at the moment, maybe not chronic health issues, weather conditions, vision, so many different things. And these are all questions that I want to encourage us to allow the professionals to research, investigate, and answer, because can we truly know everything? Can we truly ever know little things that might be missed? And I often ask myself, when is it just purely an unavoidable act of God, something that was meant to be? I know that's hard to fathom, and maybe it's hard for you. It's not so much for me, I guess, because of my faith. I do believe that everything happens for a reason, and I often know that I don't know what that reason is. I just have to give it time to unfold. I remember the Delta 191 crash in Dallas at the DFW airport. I think that was in August of '85, honestly. And ultimately, it was deemed a microburst, kind of came out of nowhere. They were landing. Everything was, quote unquote, as it should be. Yes, there were weather conditions around the airport. Now, again, I'm not a pilot, and I didn't go back and research this. I have read the book, Fire and Rain, which is quite interesting, and quite an interesting name, because the James Taylor song is one of my favorites. I've seen Fire and I've seen Rain. Anyway, that's a book that you can check out and read or buy and learn more about that particular crash years after, when they did the research. But, ultimately it hit the water towers, I believe, there at the end of the runway. And the funny thing is, I had flown in and out of Dallas for years as an aviation employee myself, and I was familiar with those water towers. I just always looked for them. They were kind of like a vantage point that, where was I exactly? What runway was I landing on as a passenger? And I was quite aware of those water towers, which are still there, and I still watch for them every time I land in Dallas. So that was an interesting one. And then United 232, the crash in Sioux City, where they landed it out in the fields, which was I think the hydraulics, something to do with that. Something got cut accidentally or went wrong. But again, like so many things could, well, I don't even remember if they deemed that any kind of like workmanship error or whatever. But stuff happens, stuff goes on, and you can go back and research some of these yourself. And then, of course, there was the U.S. Airways flight 1549, the bird strike. And the Miracle on the Hudson with Sully and that whole thing. And, that was amazing. It was amazing, the heroics of that crew working together, getting that plane, making the best possible choice that they could. And many people wanted to second guess that decision, but it ended up being the perfect decision and all ended up well. Now, I can tell you later, when that movie came out, I got really, really mad because if you do the research on that movie, I don't even remember what the name of it was, but they totally rewrote that story. There's a lot of non-factual information in that movie, mostly around the NTSB and the hearings that they held and, making the crew stay over for months and all of the different things in that. A lot of that was, what do they call it? Historical fiction or, loosely based on the true story. Because I remember sitting in the theater and watching that movie and thinking, I don't remember all of that about the NTSB. And then later, of course, I went back and researched it, and you can Google it yourself. US Airways Flight 1549, I believe it is. And you will find with that movie the parts that were made up. And that always really frustrated me because I thought to myself, it's horrifying anytime there's an airplane crash for many reasons, but it's horrifying for the traveling public who, of course, often have fear and anxiety around flying anyway. And then when there's a crash, it makes it worse. And then to watch a movie like that and think of different things that went on that aren't even true, that just makes it worse. But that's a whole nother conversation. So I mentioned one of the reasons that I have come to appreciate my husband's stance on not Monday morning quarterbacking any crash is because randomly, a few years back, it's probably been, what is this, 2025? It's probably been, I don't know, a decade ago now. No, maybe less. Anyway, I was at a personal development seminar with probably about 500 people in the room, and we had gone through a session of writing out things from your past that affected your beliefs, your belief in yourself, all of that kind of stuff. We were focused on I am statements and a lot of different things and letting go of those limiting beliefs. And after we would do some of these exercises, the facilitator of the meeting would invite people who wanted to stand up and share their story. And this tiny petite woman stood up in the back and shared the story that she was the widow of the captain in a commercial airline crash that had occurred a few years prior to that. And it was deemed a lot of things: crew fatigue, commuting airline pilots, previous failed check rides, pilot error. I mean, there were so many things that came out about it. And of course, the media made a big deal. And that was before things were as divisive and heightened and to the peak that they are now with social media and podcasts and all the different things that go on. But I remember her standing up in tears and talking about how hard that was, not only to lose her soulmate and the father of her children, but also then to face the guilt and the shame of going out in public and having this pilot error thing cast over her husband, his memory, people looking at her, people asking her ridiculous questions, all of that. And I remember just sitting there and feeling stunned when she got up and shared that. And I went and found her on a break and just hugged her and cried with her for a minute, just, told her who I was, that I was also married to a pilot and that I could only imagine, but that I would carry her story with me. And I do. Every time from that moment on that there is an airplane crash, And certainly when the pilot dies or even when they don't, I always see her face, her words, her emotion come up for me. And I remind myself of that, and that, the last thing I want to do is judge anyone. So the question becomes, how can the public be supportive of the aviation people in situations like this? And I would say, first and foremost, don't speculate. Just don't speculate. It's hard. I know you can speculate in your mind, you can journal about it, whatever, but just don't go public with your speculation about things. Again, I'm just one person. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just going to give you some tips that I've learned and that I use and that I've assimilated over decades of going through this situation. Now, again, my husband never had an airplane crash. We never had any of that. Specifically, we had friends who were involved in incidents, et cetera. But I will even say, well, I'm not going to say nobody close to us has ever died in an airplane crash. That wouldn't be true. But these were more private pilot groups, or they were commercial aviators, but they were flying privately. So that's first and foremost. Just don't speculate, or at least don't do so publicly. And then be very careful sending that text, which I know in today's world is so easy to do, or contacting someone to check in right away to make sure they're okay, unless you're truly 1 degree of separation away from that person, unless you're really tight in their inner circle. They're going through a lot, and you don't know what that might be. You don't know because you're asking because you don't know. Now, again, after saying this, I'm going to say, reach out to that person who you know is in the aviation community and ask them, how would you want me to handle this? What's the best for you? And I say that because I mentioned 9/11 and the friend who called me, who was a close friend, who was in that 1 degree of separation. And so it didn't bother me at all that she called. In fact, I was grateful. Now, I will tell you, I think it was after that. I don't remember. No, maybe it was before that. I'll have to look and see. But my husband is Mark Ulmer. And um, at some point in our marriage, this was decades ago too, and you can Google this as well, a Mark Ulmer crashed in Kansas City. My husband's from Missouri, and he was around the same age. Not exactly, but there were so many things about that incident that fit the profile of my husband. And oh my gosh, like people did not know what to do. And I remember getting phone calls from some nervous friends. And it was kind of one of those things. It wasn't a commercial airline. I think it might have been a charter or a private plane or something different. I'm going to have to go back and Google all this myself. But I didn't even become aware of it initially when it very first happened because it didn't make the Phoenix newspapers. It was something that happened in Missouri. It wasn't a big commercial jet or anything like that. So it didn't make national news. But enough people found out about it, not only from Missouri and from his hometown, that started reaching out and calling, but then a few of our friends locally heard about it too. And it was so funny. I laugh about it now, thinking back on how tentative some of those calls were. Jackie, how are you? Is everything okay? Yeah, I'm great. Why? Oh, good, because I just heard about a Mark Ulmer who was killed in a plane crash in Kansas City. So again, I mean, what are the odds of that? But it definitely happened. So, today we've got this current drama that's unfolding with the airplane crash, American Airlines and the Black Hawk helicopter. So many things are circling around about that. And along with that, the speculation. It was a training flight. So people are making assumptions about that the pilots had very little flight time. Now, in the military, training flights can mean anything. It can be the most seasoned pilots out there doing training flights. So we make a lot of assumptions around what training means. Was it DEI? It was less than 1 week after the change of guard in some of the administration. I even saw a tweet on X that, this all happened because Pete Hegseth is a drunk, the new, Secretary of Defense or Department of Defense or whatever. Anyway, and then I heard it was because the TSA head was replaced. Now, the finger pointing is out of control on both sides. I'm just going to say that. The most important thing we can do is stop and pause, and more than anything, use your own critical thinking skills outside of politics, outside of which candidate you supported or didn't support, or how you feel about any of that. Any logical thinking person knows that none of this was caused by a change in administration in under a week. I mean, think about it. No matter how you feel about anything, no kind of change happens that quickly, meaning regulations and systems and ways of doing things and procedures, none of that changed that quickly. So again, just really use your common sense skills. And I think the NTSB spokesperson, Jennifer Homedy, handled it best last week when she was asked about the White House administration and other speculation. And she said, with all due respect, I think the press also likes to state what probable cause is before we get to the probable cause. So what I'm going to say is you need to give us time. Beautifully stated, didn't defend anybody, didn't throw anybody under the bus, just said it all takes time. And so it's important that we remember this. Nothing unveils the truth like time. It's like putting together a puzzle. I remember, as I said, I'm an airplane crash geek. And when TWA Flight 800 crashed off of Long Island, there's been a book written, documentaries, and I remember seeing the hangars full of pieces of airplane pieces, seats that were retrieved, windows, cockpit pieces, wings, all of it pulled together in hangars where they literally reconstructed the airplane as best they could. You can probably see this on history.com, but again, if you go Google TWA 800 crash, you will find it. The documentary is interesting. And the important thing to note about documentaries is remember this: a documentary is always slanted to the viewpoint that the creators want you to believe. Now, I'm not saying that they're lying. I'm not suggesting that, but when you think about it, whoever writes and authors and, puts together and produces a documentary has a viewpoint, and that's the viewpoint that they want to instill in you. It's the same with news reports. It's the same with social media accounts. It's the same even with our friends and ourselves. So as I record this, the rescuers are just beginning the task of retrieving airplane and helicopter parts from the river. And then sadly, this was followed by the medical jet crash on January 31st in Philadelphia. And it appears that in less than a minute, I've heard 30 seconds after takeoff, almost like a missile, that plane crashed into the ground and just literally imploded. And now we know the black box has just been recovered. So it's going to take time to piece all of it together. And I always ask myself, will we ever truly know everything about a crash? Do black boxes and documented recording from, airplane systems, do tower and aircraft communications, eyewitness reports, and phone videos, do any of those things ever truly tell us everything? And then as the general public, we have to ask ourselves, why are we so quick to demand to know why it happened, what exactly happened, and more? And is there one simple answer? And how often are there several factors that all converge together on a collision course, kind of pun intended, to result in what we see? I don't know, but I often believe this to be true because I don't know, and neither do you, honestly. Time is going to reveal more. And as hard as it is, we just have to be patient and give it time. So let's all take a pause because beautiful lives have been cut short. They've been ended. Family and friends are grieving. Cities and locals are grieving. Aviation communities are grieving. Military communities are grieving. Witnesses cannot unsee the tragedy that they witness and that they are innocent victims of. Trust has been altered. Beliefs are altered. Fears are heightened. My sincere condolences go out to the family and friends of the victims and the aviation community who always grieves these horrendous accidents. And I include myself, as I mentioned, as an aviation geek when I say that the public often has an infatuation of sorts with all of these events. I know for me, I've learned to take a pause and just give it time because time heals. We do recover. We get back in the saddle. We get back on the airplane. We walk down that jet bridge, that jetway, cross the jet bridge, and get onto that airplane. We send our partners and spouses off to fly the friendly skies, hopefully holding a little more steadfast to the things in life that truly matter. We hug a little longer. We hug a little harder, we hold a little tighter, and we make it a little more meaningful. So thank you for being here today and making it this far. I really, truly appreciate you. And I wish you blue skies and tailwinds until we meet here again. I'm Jackie Almer. Thanks for listening to the Pilot Wife Podcast. Do you ever find yourself on the struggle bus with relationships, career, or life in general? I'm a mindset and peak performance coach helping women rediscover their own sense of identity and purpose, avoid turbulence, and put their own oxygen mask on first. Together, we work to get you out of autopilot and create a better flight plan for life and relationship success. As a pilot wife for over 30 years, I've navigated thousands of miles and moments in aviation, mommyhood, business, and life in general. I would love to offer you a free call to see if I might be able to help you too. You can go to coach.pilotwifepodcast.com. And if you have a topic suggestion or a story to share on the show, go to ask.pilotwifepodcast.com. And of course, you'll find all of this at resources.pilotwifepodcast.com. Please take a moment to review and rate the show on whatever your favorite podcast app is. This helps the show get found by others who need what we have here. I'll see you on the journey, and thanks for listening.